Hey there, it's Jess. If you're new here, I'm a certified professional canine nutritionist, raw nutrition certified for dogs and cats, a holistic pet health coach, the founder of Wild Wellness Pet, and the host of the Pet Parenting Reset podcast that you're listening to right now, where every pet deserves the absolute best, and every pet parent is welcome. Learn from the best holistic and integrative experts in veterinary medicine and nutrition every Tuesday right here on this podcast. Or get individualized help with your pet through one-on-one consultations and take a deep dive into the root cause with the Wild Wellness Bioenergetics at-home testing kit. It's time to rethink how we raise our pets, a reset to naturally healthy dogs and cats. If you've been feeling like there has to be something more, something better, a better way to raise healthier pets, welcome to the Pet Parenting Reset. Welcome back, pet parent. I'm really excited to bring back Dr. Odette Suter for you guys today. If you remember, it's been a little while since she's been on the podcast, but if you are an OG, you remember when she was on, and you remember me saying that one of the very first books I ever read when I first started going down this journey of integrative, holistic modalities, bringing them into my pets' lives, it was her best-selling book, What Your Vet Never Told You. And so, first of all, let me welcome Dr. Odette Suter back to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's so nice to be here and chatting with you, Jessica. I never knew that about, that was your first intro.
Yeah, I think back because it's been so long. I mean, it feels like it's been so long now because I've kind of immersed myself in it. But I remember the very first thing I ever found was a Facebook page it was not Rodney or Karen, even though they have some of the biggest Facebook pages. I found another Facebook page that led me to them. And when I first started just doing a deep dive, I love to read. I love books. I love to read. Give me all the books. I have a stack this big of my to be read pile, but not to mention my Audible wish list. But yeah, it was one of the very first books that I actually read, and it's very approachable. So that was one of the things when I got started. I was like, okay, there are books that are this thick, 4 inches thick, and I'm like, okay, I can do that, but it's going to take me some time. So finding your book, I was like, oh, I got through that on a plane ride, but it was impactful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, that's what people tell me. They read it in an afternoon, and it really kind of gives them the lowdown, because in the end, you can get into all the details and sort of lose the forest for its trees. I think that's how you say it, right? I always say it. But in any case, and I'm also somebody who doesn't really beat around the bush. I'm a very bad storyteller as a result of it, because it's like, okay, it started here and then here's the end. 2 minutes later, I'm done with the story. So that's my book in a way as well, just kind of give you what really matters, rather than going on too many tangents and making it more complicated, because I think we have enough of that going on in this world right now. I call it the internet vomit because there's so much information out there. So people get confused. They are overwhelmed with information. They don't know what to do with it. Either they go and buy a bunch of stuff that's not really helping, or they end up just completely paralyzed, not knowing where to go from bringing it down to basics, to, kind of clear things and make it more understandable in the sense of what really matters, is very helpful for people, obviously. And I just realized I forgot to put on my poop hat. Grab it real quick.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
There you go.
We're going to be talking about the gut and everything,
Yes.
Right fire here.
Well, yes, we are going to talk about the gut, but before we do that, I just want to kind of continue that conversation you just started around this vomiting of information, not all of which is true. There's so many opinions, and not to say that opinions are bad or wrong, but it's overwhelming for a lot of pet parents, and even people like me who, I try to stay up on what's going on and what works and what doesn't, and all the different some of the different holistic modalities. And there was a time this past summer in 2025, I was at a conference and there were multiple speakers. And one of the conversations that I started at the end of the conference was that this is why pet parents are so confused, because even among all of these amazing veterinarians and pet food formulators and all of the wonderful people that we love to listen to, in one conference, we had conflicting viewpoints from two different speakers. And it's like, both of them seem right, right? You listen to one and you're like, you make so much sense. And you listen to the other and you go, you make so much sense, but you're saying exactly the opposite things. So what do we do? And that's just confusing, but also to me, kind of points us right back around to the reason why so many people are finding functional medicine again, because everything it needs an individualized approach, and what works for one dog may not work for another dog.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, the different things that each of us learn and bring to the table is based on our experience, our lives, our lenses, our views of things, and what we were diving in. And so then if you get conflicting information, doesn't mean that one is wrong or the other one is right. It's more that it may just fit different situations, basically. But we certainly also have so much information and so much more knowledge that's coming out. For example, microbiome research has exploded. When I was doing my lectures at the AHVMA conference, I just, for fun's sake, I Googled, how many new papers were coming out every day. And within like a 5-day period back in, I think it was in 23 or 22, there were like 700 new papers in 5 days that came out. So that's like, a bit more than 100 new papers every day. There's no way anyone can keep up with that. There's no way. And so it's not just microbiome research, it's mitochondrial research, it's research in cancer, it's research in inflammation. Cell danger response is one of the things that I've been kind of looking into a little bit. Chronic diseases. There's exploding information that is coming to light now, and that makes it really confusing. I mean, it's for me as well. I feel like I know this much, in the grand scheme of things, and so I tend to focus back. Oh, we have a little visitor there. So I tend to focus back on what's simple, what makes sense, what's common sense, what is nature doing, and kind of going back to that as my anchor, because otherwise I would also get lost in the weeds. Because, for example, in the mitochondrial cell danger response, I can talk a little bit more about what that is, but they're then deciding, coming up with some kind of a drug to manipulate it, and I'm like, okay, probably not the best idea. So, it gets really confusing, and you can kind of get lost in the weeds and losing nature. And that's a little bit what happened with the whole pet food industry. I mean, frankly, I mean, if you were to, bring a bag of kibble and write down, with all the list of ingredients that are on there, and you give that to a person from like 200 years ago, they're like, what? It makes no sense. There's no rationale to feeding this junk that we're providing the animals. And so we have to kind of let go of some of whatever other people are saying and such, and kind of get back to common sense. What do we know, right? We know we need oxygen. We know we need water. We know that we feel better when we're out in nature, these things. And the body knows what it needs too, what feels good. And the animals will tell you as well. For example, my neighbor's dog, if I offer him a piece of celery, he's like, "Are you crazy? I don't want that stuff.
Yeah.
Eat that." So we have to kind of listen and go back to that. And I think that's a little bit, what we're being asked to do nowadays is to find the power inside of us, the knowledge inside of us. And sure, it's great to have additional knowledge from, because it can make sense and put some pieces together and all of that. But in the end, we just have to focus on re-empowering ourselves, taking our power back rather than giving it away to someone else and thinking that, well, they know better. In the end, as a pet parent, you're the expert of your animal. You know what works for your animal. You know what makes sense for them. Listening to your guts, pun intended, is important.
Well, yeah, it's hard to get back to that where you actually kind of know what your gut is telling you. I feel
Mhm.
like it's become difficult to get back to that. But so you have done tons of research into the gut microbiome, and so much so that I'm like intimidated. I don't really even know what to ask you because I have no idea what you know. I think at the end of the day, we can probably bring it back to a very simple statement like you just made about getting back to nature. What are some of, if you don't mind divulging, some of like, if I were to just ask you, what's like the most interesting or coolest thing you've learned in your research, what comes to mind?
Well, I think the coolest thing is really that most every microbe, parasite, yeast, whatever fungal, organism or whatever is out there, they're not our enemies, you know, because we were trained and not for not that long, we have now been trained to look at everything as our enemy. And that's not the case because most of these, bugs, they've been living on this planet for like 3+ billion years. And they've not really, I mean, they've kind of evolved and they've also discovered and, perfected strategies of survival that are absolutely necessary on this planet. And we are at a place in the world right now with all the pollution and the destruction and the diseases and everything that we've created. We are in a place where either we are going to find some survival strategy that is going to let us survive and keep going, or we're going to perish and all, die. And it's not going to be the parasites and the bacteria and so on. They are probably going to do just fine because bacteria, for example, they can evolve in like a short 2-hour period. They can completely change and adapt to the environment. As humans, animals, we have so many cells and so much going on. There's no way that we can adapt so quickly. But, we can't forget that we're only 10% cells and 90% microbe. So we have all of these amazing survival specialists and experts to help us adapt. And so if we can keep them alive in us and have that diversity of the microbial community, then we stand a much better chance. And there's a lot of research going on these days with microplastics. How can we destroy microplastics? And there are some probiotics. I think it was from the lactobacillus family. I can't remember for sure now, but if you have some of those in your gut and take some of those, then it will limit the amount of microplastics that go into the system. So microbes are going to be saving us because they can do so many things that we can't do. They can process something that would take years or even decades for us humans to do that in a lab at temperatures much higher and also creating a lot more pollution in the process. So they have they have incredible abilities to do things. And so making friends, I think, is the thing is a kind of at the forefront for me is, we have to be friends with them. And that's why I post photos of me in the bathroom. And I know you kind of picked up on it too. I
I
mean,
know. I
in the
haven't done it.
of a airport, fully dressed. I want to
Yeah.
clarify.
Fully dressed. I know. I haven't done it lately, even though I was traveling recently, but I every time I stop in a bathroom in an airport, I always think about it. Like, even one time I went to go do it, but there were just too many people in there, and I'm like, "I'm gonna be the weirdo taking a picture in a bathroom with everybody looking at me like, 'I know you're not trying to take a picture with me.'" But it is very funny, and I actually said something to someone recently when I was traveling, because he was talking about how, like, health conscious his wife is, um, and somehow we got on the topic of porta potties, and I'm like, "Well, I mean, public restrooms, they're great.
Yeah,
Natural FMT, right?" I don't know.
yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah, and I don't wanna say that everything happens for a reason. I truly believe that, and there's a trajectory and there are learning curves, but germ theory did a lot of damage. And the way our doctors are taught now, where it's just like, kill it or cut it out, it's basically like the everything they try to do doesn't when I hear you say, "Well, we're only like 10% of us," really,
Right.
like, then that really puts it into perspective as to why that's not ever gonna work.
Hmm.
And it could work in some certain situations, like, it might be necessary. I don't ever wanna say that. I mean, thank goodness for emergency medicine, right? Thank goodness we have that. But it really puts it into perspective as to how detrimental it is for us to always reach for that first. Yeah. So when we think about, I truly believe where, like, as humans, we're in a health crisis. We have been in a health crisis. I think people are waking up to the fact that we're in a health, not everybody, but I think people are waking up to the fact that we're in a health crisis and that our food and environment are huge factors in that. And the same is true for our pets. You've already talked a little bit about pet food, and certainly I talk about pet food all the time. It is my thing that I will always talk about, and hydration and like all the things. I actually the reason I hydration came to mind is because the day we're recording this, the episode that's going live tomorrow is with a water expert. And I actually like put this off for so long because for whatever reason, it feels so overwhelming to me to tackle how terrible our water supply is and not really knowing the best answers for it, and also knowing that this is just a tangent I'm going on. The EPA guidelines are detrimental to women because they're based on a 170-pound man. But then to think about how detrimental they are to our pets just because all of the EPA guidelines are based on a 170-pound man. Like, we don't even think about this, and my mind is being blown. I just edited the episode, and I'm just like, "This is so over." I don't even know if I wanna put this I'm going to put the episode out, but to me, I'm like, I'm still so overwhelmed.
Hmm.
And so, overall, just the idea of keeping ourselves and our pets healthy can just feel so overwhelming. To
Yeah.
pet parents, to even pet professionals. I feel like, even somebody like you who, you're professionally trained as a veterinarian, like, do you have moments of overwhelm still? Especially when you dig into, like, as much research as you've been digging into. Do you still have those moments of overwhelm?
Yeah, yeah, because it feels like there's so much more that I want to learn, and it just kind of flattens me out when I just think about it. It makes me tired, to think about it. But certainly, and in the end, I'm not the youngest chick on the planet anymore, so I've had time to sort of go through the process of coming out of vet school, thinking I have to know everything, behaving as if I need to be God because there is no God that's going to save all the animals. And if I don't do it, and it's not going to happen type of thing, which, it's more of a subconscious thing. It's not like, I'm going in there and I have to save this animal. I mean, certainly there's some of that, but I've kind of come around, in a circle where I'm more at peace with not knowing, because I've realized that when I'm in that space of not knowing, then usually I get some answers. Something will come up, and sometimes something comes up with an animal and I just sit with it for like a few days, and then all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's what we need to do." So it's changed that way, but it was not easy to get here. I had to do a lot of work on it because it requires a lot of trust and a lot of, well, and experience that things will turn out okay. Because if I look back, even though things weren't always all nice and peachy and rosy, in the end, everything is seemed to always get better. Like it was kind of like a upward spiral. Basically, you revisit some of the same things, but it's always getting a little bit better. And so that, looking back, kind of creates more trust that things are okay and we're going to be okay, and certainly learning from all the experiences and realizing that life is giving me things. It's not doing something to me. It's not about punishment, whatever the lessons are. It's about helping me to grow more and have developed more wisdom, more trust, more faith, more whatever it may be. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think the undertone to all of that is this, like, grip that we have on trying to control everything,
Yeah,
that we
exactly.
have to be able to let that go and, like you said, trust that it's all gonna work out. That can be really, really hard.
Yeah, it's not easy because we're in a survival. I mean, we're survival beings. I mean, the physical body is about surviving. I mean, that's the main function of the body is survival and procreation. And so, yeah, you kind of hit it on the head about the control, and the more we try to control things, the worse it gets generally.
Mhm. So, I know you have a program that pet parents can join, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. And I'm sure there's a pretty heavy focus on the gut and what you can do to support the gut in its natural processes of repairing and just overall health. What I actually want, like, I would love for you to answer this question in 2 different ways. I would love to hear what, like, if you could only tell pet parents one thing to know about keeping their pet's gut health in line, but then also, what would you tell veterinarians, like the average veterinarian in America who is probably very overwhelmed, working for a corporation, like, doing all the things that most, I think, veterinarians in this country now are doing. I can imagine they're probably 2 different things. I'm curious. What would you tell pet parents? What would you tell veterinarians?
Actually, it would be the same. Yeah, I would say, what is nature? What did nature give the animals to be able to survive? And sure, with a veterinarian, I would probably go a little bit more into physiology and ask them, do you really think the physiology of an animal has changed in the last 100 years? When it took 3 billion years to get where we are now, I doubt it. I mean, you'd have to show me that. Certainly the pathologies have changed because we've made a mess of things. But if you look at it, I think an animal will still thrive much more on what nature provided if they're in decent shape. I mean, if you take a dog or a cat who has major inflammatory bowel issues going on or whatever it may be, I mean, I see so many animals that are hypersensitive to everything. You give them one treat and they have diarrhea from that. And, I'm talking about, this much. So I'm not talking about those animals, obviously.
Yeah.
Sometimes with those, you can't just switch things around, or just say, "Oh, we're gonna do what nature provided," because they can't handle it anymore because they're so sick. So we have to get them back to the place where they can handle nature. So that's how far away we've gotten from nature that we can't even handle nature anymore. The way it was meant to be because we've gotten so sick basically. So with veterinarians, I would probably talk a little bit more in that direction and yeah, have them look at physiology and maybe see if I could kind of wake up a little bit of the common sense because I have to be honest, I don't really understand how any person can think that some food out of a bag that's been highly processed can be something that would be healthy. Because, I mean, if you were to tell somebody, a human, you should only eat like cereal out of a box for the rest of your life and never change, always the same one, always from the same brand, I would say they would probably say I'm insane. I mean, I hope they would say that.
Yeah, I would hope so too, because
Well, I
it is
don't know.
crazy.
To me, there's a big question mark. I don't know what's going on. Why there's, how they got bought like that somehow. But
Yeah.
I may be
Yeah.
wrong as well. you know, who knows?
Yeah, I just don't think I truly I will say this as many times as I am afforded the opportunity to say this. I feel like even though it feeds still the majority of animals and we have shelters and rescues and in itself is overwhelming and sad to think about. I still, at the end of the day, feel like kibble is just a failed experiment, and, like, at some point, we're gonna have to
Mm.
all collectively come to that realization that the kibble is the experiment, and we are seeing that it has failed. Like, just look at if we look at nothing else but cancer rates, it's failed.
Yeah.
It's failed.
And, we humans, we love to experiment. I mean, that's how we learn, basically. I mean, you look at a kid, right? Or a dog, a puppy, they're going to take everything into their mouth to kind of figure out what it is. And then they'll go, blah, 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 that's not good or whatever it may be. So we all learn through experimentation. And we as humans have experimented in a lot of different directions with a lot of different things. And unfortunately, there have been some good things that have happened. Obviously, we have electricity, we have all kinds of things that we didn't have. We have running water, we have wheels, we have, tools and stuff like that. But with everything good that has come out of the experimentation, it's also brought in something not so good. For example, electricity creates a lot of electromagnetic radiation that affects the body. With running water, if it goes through pipes that have mercury or whatever, no lead pipes, that didn't really work out very well. So a lot of the progress comes with some negative to it. Airplanes, we can fly airplanes, right? Which is still kind of surprised. I still don't know how that's possible because I tried to flap my wings and nothing happens. But then at the same time, they create a lot of pollution. So on this planet, unfortunately, everything positive always comes with a negative because we live in a world of duality. So, with all these experiments that we've done, a lot of them have kind of gone in a direction that have created a little too much negativity. And then the compounding of all of those has then gotten us to where we are now, because it's not just the food. Because way back when, animals, dogs were probably able to live on kibble their whole life and nothing ever happened, and they were fine, and they died at like 15, 16 or something like that, because they didn't have all the other compounded things on top of everything. But now we've compounded everything so much. And again, I'm not saying we should feed kibble. I'm not saying that at all. But it's like when you're only dealing with one thing that's really impacting the body, then you're more likely to survive it than if you have a compound of multiple things that are affecting it, including also the genetic and epigenetic changes that have happened from one generation to another. Thinking about the Pottinger cats. I don't know if you've ever talked about those in your podcast.
No, I haven't, but it I have so many things that I wanna ask you. The well, first, before I go down my crazy thought process, tell me about the Pottinger cats.
Yeah, so Pottinger was a doctor who lived kind of in the 1940s, and he had a sanatorium where he was basically treating people with tuberculosis. And at the time, he was using adrenal extract from cats. And when people around the area heard about it, they started dumping cats at his doorstep. So he ended up with about 900 cats. And obviously having 900 cats and needing to feed them, that was a little bit of a challenge. So some of these cats, he had two groups. So one group of cats, they were getting raw food. So leftovers from the butcher, that sort of thing. And then, and raw milk. And then the other half, the other group, they got cooked things, cooked foods, cooked milk, etc. And obviously, you can see there's not a huge difference. It's just from raw to cooked. Now we are going from raw to like highly processed kibble that is really totally inappropriate physiologically. Plus, he also lived in the 1940s, so pollution was not really a thing back then because, there were very few cars around. Well, maybe the coal industry, I don't know. But in any case, pollution probably was not what it is, and quality of food was still better than what it is now. But in any case, with each generation, these cats that were on a cooked food diet, they were getting worse and worse. So they were eventually losing the bony structure. So their skeletal structure of the face became different. So if you have a cat that has a very narrow type of face, they probably don't have a ton of bone structure, not the same way as like a real tomcat with like the round face, right? They were getting allergies, they were getting other kinds of chronic issues. And then by the third generation wasn't even able to reproduce anymore on the diet that they were on. Whereas the cats that were fed a raw diet, they stayed healthy throughout the 4 generations. And then he tried to also see how long would it take to take these diseased cats, how many generations would it take to get them back to health? So he took the first generation raw cooked fed animals and turned them back, got them back on a raw food diet. And it took about 4 generations just to get them back to, you know, closer to where they were. They never were completely healthy. If you imagine with humans or animals now, both obviously, we start out with a generation that was really healthy. The next generation got more pollution, more things compounded, so they aren't as healthy. The next generation gets whatever this generation is passing along, plus whatever their generation is getting, which is more pollution, more deficiency, more of everything, and so on. So that's why now you see more animals being sick from very, basically as soon as they're born, because they're getting whatever mom is passing along, generation to generation. Because from a pollution standpoint, toxins are passed along 4 generations. Epigenetic changes are also passed on at least 4 generations. But because each generation gets their own junk and, exposure, it's so compounded that it just grows exponentially. The effect, you know, the the
Yeah.
effect on the body basically is grows exponentially. So yeah.
Yeah, so BC Henshin and I talked about that without really knowing what we were talking about, but it was about 2 years ago now that a very popular pet food brand and a few ancillary brands started popping up as well, seemed to be causing a lot of animals, illness, and unfortunately, quite a few animals died, like, with new bags of food being opened, and there was never any resolution to that, but that is what I had BC Henshin on, who has been in the pet food industry for decades, and we were talking about, like, what could this be, and we were just talking about, like, his perspective and seeing how, like, there are cities and counties that there's no way they're going to let anything happen to a pet food manufacturing plant, because it literally provides all of the tax revenue and, all the things. So it was all of the, like, behind the scenes type things. But that was ultimately what we got to, was that, if we're testing for the same things we've always been testing for in a pet food bag, that maybe it's not hitting any maximums, maybe it's not hitting any, like, "Oh my gosh, this is horrible, this is gonna kill an animal," but the fact that so many generations of animals have been sick and they're getting sicker every generation, that what was a maximum before, like, maybe it's different now for these animals because they can't handle as much as 4
Mhm.
or 5 generations ago could handle. So, I'm glad you actually have, like, the scientific information to put behind that theory.
Yeah, no, and that's true. And that kind of would sort of bring me back to that cell danger response that I mentioned earlier, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because anytime the body gets exposed to something that could potentially kill it, there's a response from the mitochondria. They switch to, from energy producing to basically sending out signals of danger. And what's happening nowadays is that we are exposed to so many things that are basically triggering this danger response, that then we sort of get stuck in it. Because, for example, when you cut yourself, right? Initially, you have some inflammation, you have more immune cells that are coming to make sure it's cleaned up, and then you have some chemicals that are being released to help to break down and eliminate some of these damaged cells that are then gobbled up by the cleanup crew of the immune system. And then eventually it starts to regenerate new cells, and then eventually the cut is healed, right? So that's how a normal healing response is supposed to go. But when we have all these chronic diseases, it's basically we have the initial whatever it is that caused it, that started it. And then it just kind of stays in that loop. It never comes out of that loop. It never heals. So it gets stuck in the process of healing. And so with chronic diseases, we have this constant cell danger response that's present. Healing doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of stays there. So if you then add more danger, if you add one little added danger to it, it can just throw everything off. And that little danger could also be, for example, a supplement that should actually help, and that's how then some animals will react to a little bit of enzymes in their food. I mean, that should not cause a reaction, right? Or switching food from rabbit from the same brand to turkey should also not cause a reaction, right? But because they're all the cells are already in so much cell danger response and kind of stuck in the cycle of not healing, things just end up getting worse. So when you're saying that, it could be a multitude of things that could have happened with these bags, yes, because, those animals who were probably in better shape, they probably had less of a reaction to it, whereas those that were already sick, they probably would have had more problems with it. So,
Yeah. So I kind of want to switch gears a little bit, but
mhm,
kind of also back up because you brought up cats and eating raw food, even versus cooked foods. One of the things that, especially in the raw feeding community, is still talked about a lot is feeding vegetation. And I know well, I don't want to say I know, I believe a lot of the research that has been presented to us show that more diversity in the microbiome overall, generally speaking, is better, is going to lead to a healthier microbiome. And there are some people that say that vegetation and feeding lots of different types of vegetation is the way to get there. There are some people that believe that still minimal vegetation and more like fur and feathers and all of like there's so many different like ideas of how we actually get the fiber into the diet, of how we diversify the gut. And then I'm curious as to your thoughts on both cats and dogs, because cats being obligate carnivores, are we still concerned with diversity in the gut microbiome in the same way we are with dogs? Are we supposed to get there in the same way? How do you view that?
mhm. Yeah, so every species on this planet thrives on diversity. Diversity is key for survival. So that goes for cats as well. Now they will have a little bit of a different microbiome than a dog, for example, or a human, just because of what they eat. But they too need fiber in their diets because certain microbes need fiber in order to make the short chain fatty acids, for example, like butyrate, which help with the energy production of the cells and gut healing. It has all kinds of other functions as well. But we do need to feed the microbes, and some microbes do get fed well with fiber. They need a little bit of fiber. So we all need a little bit of that, but a cat may need less than a dog, for example, because of how their GI tract is and such. But in the wild, they would chew on little things. They eat a little bit of grass, right? They will eat a full mouse because usually what they leave of a mouse is usually the kidney. So there's something, but the guts usually get eaten. And what did the mouse eat? It ate fiber, right? And mice have a much bigger GI tract compared to body size compared to cats, for example, and dogs, because they have a much shorter GI tract, or a horse, huge, obviously, or a cow. But because, well, all herbivores have a bigger GI tract than carnivores. And so a mouse will have a bit of a bigger, um, GI tract as well. And so there will be more material in it. There will be more bacteria in the gut of a mouse, for example. So they would get that too in nature. So again, we need to go back to nature. So can we try to feed them as close as possible to what nature would provide? And I know there are some companies that sell ground up mice. Although I did try to give that to my sister's cat once, and he's like, "I'm not eating that." I mean, I had to agree. It looked a little disgusting. Maybe it
Yeah.
was frosted too long or something. Who knows? But in any case, yeah, again, mimicking nature.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that brings up another topic of probiotics, which
Mm.
are all the rage and everybody talks about them and everybody thinks that everybody and every dog and every cat and everybody should always be on probiotics. And I'm not saying that there isn't some truth in there, but I definitely have talked to different people, again, that have different opinions on the best way to get probiotics in an animal. I certainly talked to some people who believe that it should come as much as possible from food sources. And then, of course, there are people who love their supplements. And the only real negative I've heard, and I'm just curious your opinion on this, about like supplementing probiotics that are not necessarily food based probiotics, is that to have the shelf stability, you're not getting the really like fragile probiotic strains, and those are often what are actually missing and need to be supplemented, so they would be better found in whole food sources. Of course, there's also the idea that, you know, we need to be rotating no matter what kind of probiotics we're giving. We need to rotate them because that's, again, the whole point is diversity. So what are your thoughts on like food and getting probiotics from food sources versus supplementation?
Yeah. So when we look at probiotics and the probiotic industry, that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And when I looked, when I did my biome research, I looked at what are the trends, and so the trend of probiotic sales is going up. But what's the trend of GI issues? It's also going up. So if the probiotics were to actually work and be this like magic bullet thing, then the GI diseases should have gone down, right? Or both of them should have gone down. But that's not the case, right? So I don't think that probiotics are the full answer. They can help in certain cases, certainly. But you mentioned the viability of microbes. The thing is that the GI tract itself, in the stomach, it still has a little bit of oxygen, still a bit of oxygen in the small intestine, but less. And as it goes further back towards the anus, there's less and less oxygen in the gut. And so we also have bacteria that thrive in oxygen. They need oxygen to survive. And then we have bacteria who would die in oxygen-rich environments. So they're the anaerobes, right? And then we have some that are in between that can survive in both oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor environment. So when we're trying to replenish the microbes in the oxygen-poor areas in the GI tract, we need oxygen. We don't need the oxygen loving ones. We need the other ones. And they're much harder to culture because you have to also culture them in an oxygen poor environment. And that is much more difficult than just the regular probiotics that you can find on the market that are, easy to culture. So that's a little bit of the problems. There are now processes and projects going on to make culture some of these probiotics that would be found more in the large intestine, because that's where most of the microbes are. We have a lot more microbes in the large intestine than we do in the small intestine or in the stomach. So stomach has the least amount, small intestine has a little bit more, and then we have a lot in the large intestine. So there are definitely some projects on the way to culture some of those, but they're not easy to culture. And so that's where the shelf stability, shelf life, and all that would obviously then play a role for sure. But, the problem with probiotics is that if you're lucky, there's maybe 20 different species in it. If you're lucky, most of the times it's maybe 4 or 5, if that. And the gut microbiome has between 300 and 1,000 different species at least of microbes. So you're never going to be able to replenish that with like a small little bottle of, 5 different strains or species of microbes to put into the gut. It's not possible. Plus, I obviously am a big fan of doing fecal transplants, because with fecal transplants, you get the bacteria, you get fungi, you get protozoa, you get the viruses, because there are a lot of viruses in the gut as well that actually keep the bacteria in check. So there are viruses that are specific to individual microbes. So for example, E. coli has its own viruses that keep the E. coli level in check. And these viruses in the gut, we call them bacteriophages. And so these bacteriophages are also in a fecal transplant. So they will also help to kind of balance out things. And then you also have all of the good nutrients that these microbes just made. You also have that in the poop. So when you're doing a fecal transplant, not only are you putting all the microbes in it, you're also putting in all the bacteriophages, and then you're also putting in all of the good nutrients, the postbiotics. I call them the poop, the bacterial poop. You're putting that back in, and that will then basically potentiate everything. So that's why I like fecal transplants much better, because I'm not really big into wasting money on something that may not work as well. I much rather have a sledgehammer to get the nail in than a little, I don't know, a spoon because it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Well, and gosh, I feel like I could probably just ask you questions forever, but we're getting close to that hour mark, and I want to give you the opportunity to talk about your program. And I think probably for me, the best way to learn about that is obviously every animal, in my opinion, every animal is going to require some sort of individualized approach because there are just so many factors that are different from animal to animal, even living in the same household. But do you have like a standard like protocol that you go through to start with to see where everybody's at? Like, okay, let's fix these, I don't know, 5 environmental things and then let's see where we're at and reassess. Like, how do you start out with a new client, talking to a pet parent? Like what is that framework that you provide?
hmm Yeah, so I always start out with an assessment call. So people will fill out a lengthy questionnaire so that have a bit of an understanding of what the challenges are, what they're facing, and how it's affecting them too, the owner themselves. And then based on that, if they decide to sign up, I will have them send me all of the medical records and I will go through them. And then based on those medical records, I will then design a plan to get started. And usually that starts out with like very simple things. Let's add a little bit of enzymes. Let's talk a little bit about diet. How can we start to make some small changes? Add a bit of apple cider vinegar to help digest things. And then I will give them the list of tests that I want them to do, depending on whether they, just had a blood panel with their vet or whatever it may, they may already have done some of the things. So I will just add to it so that I can get the information that I need in order to really move forward with them and really create a real plan. So that's kind of the strategy appointment that we have. And then they do the blood work or the lab work. It's not just blood, it's hair analysis, to see what toxins are they exposed to, what nutrients are deficient, what is their overall tissue level health. For example, if they're really deficient, then I know I have to go slowly with that animal and I can't already go into detox. So it will give me a bit of an idea of how quickly can I move forward? What are the next steps that we need to do for that, take for that particular individual? And then in the meantime, people will go through the process of watching the modules that I have. So I go into like the foundation of knowledge because, as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of information. People are overwhelmed with it. So I give them that foundation of knowledge that they really need to have. So bringing all of the pieces together so that it makes sense, because I find that most pet parents have a very disorganized knowledge base, because they're just picking up pieces here and there. And so it's not organized. And when it's disorganized, then the process of healing is disorganized too, because then they jump from one supplement to another, trying to see if that will help. But I help them with the modules. They get that organized foundation of knowledge that they can then build on, and that will empower them in knowing how to, how to look at things as well. Because healing also requires rethinking, looking at things differently, and that's what my book is about as well. Is like, we need to move away from, okay, I have a symptom, what pill can I use? That was kind of the old module, but then it switched into this, what I call holistic medicine, where instead of the pill, we are now looking at herbs and supplements and things like that. So I have a symptom, what supplement can I use? For example, my dog can't jump on the couch. What fish oil can I give? I'm like, well, yesterday was your dog still able to jump on the couch? Yes. Okay. So it's not a deficiency of fish oil, right? So let's just do some Cairo and look and see what's going on, if there's some pain somewhere. So in any case, I teach, the whole process is really to also teach people to think differently and ask critical questions that we ask with everything else. Because, if the car engine light goes on, right? We don't just put a piece of duct tape on it. We ask, okay, what is it, have it diagnosed by some mechanic. So we need to kind of think that way again with the animals and their health as well. So anyway, so they get that foundation of knowledge, they get like some rethinking done. And then at the same time, then I will also guide them through the process, because I will lay out a plan for each animal on how to move forward. And then we move forward on that plan during the 6 months. So every week we have live sessions where they give me updates. They let me know what's happening. They ask questions, whatever's on their mind, and I will give them the next steps to move forward. So that way they are really being coached week after week after week through this protocol that I set up. And as a result, not only will their animals improve, but they will also have much more knowledge, because they see how I think about things, how I go about things, and that will then help to kind of move along, and then also help them with any other animals they may have, and or for their own bodies. A lot of people tell me, "Oh, I'm doing the same thing for me now." I'm like, "What
Yeah.
do you do?"
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. We need it just as much.
Well, and everything that I learned is from my own journey. I mean, I had a lot of chronic health issues from a relatively early age, and it was a real pain to get through it. And because I had no strategy, I was just kind of winging it. I tried a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I mean, I gave everything a really good try. So it's not that I gave up like two days in or something like that, but nothing really worked until I figured out what it really takes, what the strategy needs to be, and that you have to really put all the pieces together to get there. And for each animal, these pieces look, I mean, they're the same, but they will look a little bit different in the sense of when are we using what. For example, for a really old dog that's already sick, I'm not going to do a bunch of detox. I'm going to build the body up, decrease a little bit of the inflammation and build the body up. And then if we ever get to detox, sure, that'd be great. I mean, as the body gets healthier, it will start to detox a little bit on its own, but I will not be pushing it. So
Yeah. Well, I love all of that. That sounds absolutely amazing. I definitely think that it's a great it sounds like a really incredible program for pet parents to go through to be able to I mean, even if you're just starting out, I can't tell you how many people reach out to me. I talk to them, I give them like I have a good conversation with them, I learn a lot about their animal and, say, I think you would really benefit from this type of testing and blah blah blah, going through all of the things, usually some sort of HTMA, like
hmm
and 6 months or a year later, I'll hear back from them, and they're like, "Okay, I actually need to do something now because I just left the emergency vet," and I'm like, it gets worse when you don't act on it, and, like, I don't know, maybe people are getting there quick I'm hopeful that people are getting there quicker.
yeah, well, because I mean, we don't like to see anybody in pain, because it's not just
Right.
the animal that's in pain and suffering, it's the people too. I mean, I talked to one person, their dog was so itchy that the husband, who was older already, like in his 70s or something like that, he had to actually sleep on his recliner with the dog on his lap to keep the dog from scratching herself bloody. They
Yeah.
ended up deciding it was not worth their money. And so I'm like, okay, well, there's nothing I can do about that then. So I think in the end, working with animals, being in the service business, we have to also learn to just take people where they're at and know that whatever they're experiencing is exactly what they need right then and there, whatever they decide. And that certainly is a challenging one too, because we want to change the world, right? But it's kind of like with addicts, right? You can't make them change until they kind of hit rock bottom. And I think, for us humans, it may be that way in other ways, or in some ways as well, because we tend to learn more from pain than we learn from joy and love.
Yeah, sadly. But that goes back to being creatures of survival, right? Like, that's how
Yeah. Yeah.
programmed for a reason. But I think I could continue to ask you all the questions, but I think that's a good place to end with that thought. And where I would just love for you to tell people, it'll be in the show notes, so you can just click the link and go. But where can people find you and find the program?
Yeah, they can just go to my website. It's odettesuterdvm.com. They can just go there and
Perfect.
find it there. I have my master class there or a link to it. So if you go there, then you can from there, you can then schedule the assessment call and then we can kind of discuss.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your knowledge. I don't know. I can't even fathom the amount of time you have put into researching the microbiome, but I know we all appreciate it because you are the kind of person that is going to hand this knowledge out into the world so that we can all benefit from it. So, thank you for that. And guys, thank you for listening to today's episode. Please make sure to, whatever app you're on listening to this, rate the show and share it with others. That is the best way to help us continue to put the show out for you. And with that, please give your pets some extra love from me and from Dr. Suter this week. And I will talk to you next week.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And thanks for having me, Jessica. It was fun.
Thank you, Dr. Suter.